I was going to present some slides, but I don't think this would help us or you, given that you wouldn't be able to see them and I wouldn't be able to see you. So, welcome to the future of technology. It's a panel we pulled together as we were sitting together talking about what are we missing from the agenda, and we've got a crack team of experts. Everyone on this panel.
Did you say crack, Dan?
Maybe. But everyone on this panel is involved with the Devoxx UK program team. And so we sit here looking at all the things that you and other people out there try to present and push forward as part of the call for papers. And what's missing? Where are we going with that? What are the tracks that we're building? And what is the content that you guys want to hear about? Not just now, but what are the trends that we're seeing in technology going forward? What are the tracks we're going to be having? What are the challenges that developers are going to start facing? We've got some interesting questions already. Well, I think they're interesting, so they must be. But there's a hashtag. If it's hashtag TechFuture, I'll be watching Twitter. So if you've got any questions, either shout them out and I'll repeat them for you, or by all means put them through on Twitter. But without any more, I'll introduce the team we've got. So we've got Arun Gupta, we've got Christopher Batey, we've got Amy Nicholson, and we've got Daniel Bryant. I hope you know all of them. If not, come up and say hi afterwards, and you can then. So, without much of ado, let's get cracking. Hello, guys. You've got one microphone down there, so you're going to have to pass it around. I'm afraid we don't have enough frequencies in here.
So, how do we crack?
We should crack on with. So, how does Java and the JVM stack up in the current world?
I would say people always say Java is dead. So and I will quote back what it says. My reports of my death are exaggerated. I mean, look at the way not just the Java language, but the JVM platform particularly is evolving. You pick Scala, you pick Groovy. I don't know, people still use Groovy, but anyway, Scala and other languages that are still evolving, they continue to target the JVM. Ruby, people still use Ruby, but I guess they do. All the languages that are still coming up new, they are still heavily targeting JVM. Java, with lambdas and functional programming and all those things, they have really kicked ass. Yes, Java JCP is a standard by the nature of it. It's slow. It takes time to evolve. But once it is evolved, there is a massive machinery by Oracle and the other community people that keeps the language evolving and makes it relevant. So I think, in my opinion, Java is very much thriving today. I still meet developers who are using Java not purely for technical reasons, but the amount of skill set that is available in the market is not only I love Go, I love Scala. How much is the learning curve? Are you getting developers, expert developers, who can handle your production scenarios for that? So it's not just purely a technical decision to me when I'm picking for a business. It's a mix of the decision, and in that sense, Java and JVM are very well thriving, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And does anyone use IT Jobs Watch? Anyone? You should look at IT Jobs Watch. It scrapes job adverts, and you can see all the job adverts in London and how many times does a particular keyword come up. And Java is by far the biggest. If you know Java and you know Python, you're going to be employed in London. Would I use Java or recommend Java as a learning language or as something I'm going to do as a hobby? Never. But if I want to be employed and pay my mortgage, I think Java is going to be around for a long, long time and is only increasing.
I was going to say, we've talked a bit about community on the end as well. So most things that become community-led, that become community-driven, actually drive forward over time naturally. I work a lot in the data space, and R and Python are absolutely driven like that as well. So I can see Java doing the same thing. And for the demand reason, working with cloud technologies, we found that actually Java and Python and Node and stuff like that are some of the first languages that people ask for to be integrated directly into or have an SDK for services. So yeah, I think there's definite demand for it. I think industry sees it. I think industry sees the skill sets that are available, and it's going to probably move forward to that.
Cool, yeah, so just adding sort of some of the comments here. I work as a consultant, so work with a lot of different clients, and we're seeing in particular microservices, obviously a super hot buzzword at the moment. We're seeing two sort of schools of thought in terms of languages of microservices. There's some people that are on the JVM and perhaps looking to diversify, because say the runtime of Go, I'm a big fan of Go, Arun as well, the runtime of Go is much more lightweight. The slight drawback there is the tooling support of Go isn't as advanced as say Java, like Spring Boot, or Java EE, Tommy Tribe, that kind of stuff. I can have a microservice up and running, build pipeline, debugging is nice and easy, whereas Go, it can be more challenging. IDE support, that kind of thing. We're also seeing sort of other people that are, say, PHP or Ruby looking to actually move to the JVM. So they want a polyglot microservice thing, but they want to bring in the JVM for the stability it provides. Like Arun said, the beauty of things like the JCP and the JSR process is that we really thought about what's going into the language, Java, what's going into the JVM. It's been battle-hardened over 20 plus years. As awesome as Go is, and some of the runtime stuff they're doing and garbage collection is freaking amazing, but you can't beat 20 years of battle-hardening, running production systems on high load. So I think it stacks up, to address your question, Dan, it stacks up quite nicely. I'm a big fan of choice, to be honest, as a consultant. I think the right tool for the job. And for me, Java is still very much a right tool for a whole bunch of jobs. So long live the Java, long live Java, and long live the JVM, I think.
Excellent. But as you pointed out, microservices, there's a drive towards the culture of DevOps as it stands. Is DevOps a means to an end, or is that DevOps the end in itself? Where are we going with DevOps, and frankly, what's the point of reaching it in conclusion?
I start again.
You can go up and down, or not everyone has to answer every question.
Yeah, I think microservices and DevOps are sort of the two prominent buzzwords. Every year at a conference, I've been part of several program committees over years. Every year there is a keyword and a dog, Ajax and dog, Web 2.0 and my dog, microservices and my dog, and those talks get accepted. Microservices, as some people call it, as SOA for hipsters or SOA 2.0, but I think it just leverages the principles of SOA very well, and it gets rid of all that vendor lock-in with ESB, vendor lock-in with SOAP, which is like Death Star, and it gets rid of all those things, and it encourages things like the REST protocol, simple REST protocol. It encourages things like asynchrony and synchronous protocols. It encourages collaboration between the team. It encourages open source protocol, all the good things that has been brewing for many years. So microservices really operates that. Now, in order for microservices, because you're going distributed, it's not easy. You are mostly pushing the problem around, as opposed to having it in a monolith. You're saying, now just distribute the problem across multiple nodes and let the multiple nodes deal the problem. That's where DevOps becomes very important and very critical, because in order for those microservices to really collaborate with each other, DevOps is mostly a cultural change, a fundamental shift. Don't think of your IT team as a DevOps. DevOps is a fundamental change in the way you build applications, where you build the application, you own it, and you suck it up to the end. I think that's the change.
So, as part of that, one of the changes is that we're moving from using frameworks to using services. As you pointed out, this is an evolution of SOA. So am I moving my dependencies from being able to include code to including someone else's service? And how's that going to change the way in which we develop when we're now dependent on someone else to provide a service for us, which could go down at any time, versus just being able to include code? And how does that affect the risk on my business and the risk on my development model?
Well, there are well-known design patterns that people follow that. You have a scalable service, first of all. It's not a single instance of a service. You're typically relying upon a load balancer, which hopefully has a whole bunch of services behind it, where there is a service failing circuit breaker pattern. Give a classic example of Netflix, which is the typical gorilla in the room when you talk about microservices. Netflix runs they have 3 data centers, of which 2 are active, all on 100% on Amazon. I think 2-year-old statistics is they get about 50 billion calls on their edge network from devices across the world. On a Friday evening, 33% of internet traffic in the US is Netflix. And in my house, there are 4 devices that are playing on Friday evening. Okay. Now, imagine those 50 billion calls coming in and then fanning out in the Amazon network. It's cloud. Shit's going to break. So, and if it's going to break, so you need to have those circuit breaker patterns. Can we keep trying it again? How does the service scale? What is my plan B, C, D? So I think those are the patterns. You have to be not a little bit, you have to be a lot more resilient. You have to be a lot more adaptable that if shit is going to break, if my service is going to break, what are my backup patterns? And I think, so essentially microservices in a broader sense is encouraging those good design principles that you need to adapt to, and then that make your services eventually succeed.
So I totally agree with you, and that's an awesome answer. Can I sort of talk about the design time side? That's for sort of the runtime, and actually even design time, Arun, sort of bake it in things like historics, circuit breakers, all that goodness. But something you mentioned there, Dan, got me thinking, and something I see a lot of my clients at the moment, is two things. It's the need to define a strong interface or strong contract. If you're whatever services, be it microservices, be it SOA, you clearly need a contract, because that's where the friction is, yeah? I say I'm going to offer you service X, you need to know how to call it and what you're going to get back, and the rate of change, that kind of thing. So getting like the API locked in, using things like Swagger, RAML, Waddle, that kind of stuff to specify it. Also using things like consumer-based contracts. So any of you familiar with domain-driven design, things like that, you can do context maps of your bounded context within your domain, and you can also sort of interface or see the interfaces with the third parties. And when you've got, say, a customer-supplier relationship or what they call a conformist relationship, you want to put things like consumer-based contracts in there to verify that what people say they're going to give you, they actually still are. And you want to put it in your build pipeline as well. Two other awesome techniques I'm using a lot at the moment are things like mocking and stubbing. So we've agreed our contract, the third party, or even another team in the organization, if you're using internal open source model. You've agreed your contract, but how do you've got your one service and it's dependent on, say, 5 other ones. You don't want to spin up 5 other ones. That gets crazy really quick, yeah. Particularly if you're on the JVM, dare I say it, because the heap size usually kind of, soon sucks up all the memory. So what you want to do is you want to use mocking to kind of mock things out in, say, unit tests or more integration tests, really. But you also want to use a technique which doesn't get as much love as I think it should, called service virtualization. So service virtualization, basically you can sort of virtualize the services. So the classic is things like VCR and Betamax, where you can record requests and responses, but you can also do things like synthesize services. So hands up, with a disclaimer here, I'm working with a company called Specto Labs, and they're doing this awesome Go-based service virtualization tool called Hoverfly. It's a lightweight service virtualizer, which we're using to kind of simulate multiple services in the stack. So when we're developing, as long as we've got the contract, we can just spin up this lightweight Docker container with Hoverfly in, and it pretends to be all the other services. So a couple of things hopefully there to think about in addressing some of the questions that are.
Yeah, I completely agree that the testing techniques and your development environments and how you're going to ensure that your service interacts with others is super important. But the thing I see going wrong time and time again when we're moving to this world are the service boundaries. So when I first started working, I don't like the word microservices, I like the word medium services because I don't like them to be too small. That was taking an existing application from a really well-known domain and separating it out for actual business reasons, like the particular availability of this one we needed to make much higher, and we didn't want to make it for the entire thing. A project I'm currently working on has done it from scratch, which I personally think is a terrible idea. You will get the service boundaries wrong. You'll end up needing to do some form of distributed transaction. If you ever see one of your services have an endpoint which looks a bit like a rollback endpoint, you know probably a boundary has gone wrong. And when you get into that state, it's so hard. You can't do coordinated transactions over HTTP. You can give it a go, though.
I'm going to take it on a slightly different note, I think, that one. We had a chat earlier, actually, about... And at Microsoft, we do a little bit of this, is around providing services to you guys as endpoints, so just as endpoints, HTTP requests. And I think one of the powerful things, that there is obviously a risk with that, is that will change as well as technology moves forwards. But one of the nice things about it, and I think one of the things that everyone's quite surprised at, is if you have someone inside your business who has a specific skill set, so I work a lot with sometimes data scientists, and they are few and far between. There's not a lot of them out there. I kind of call them unicorns sometimes. And they have a vast skill set, and they build some fantastic stuff, but not everyone does that. But everyone wants that kind of intelligence maybe, or that kind of insight in some of their applications. So being able to have someone package it up and actually be able to call into it, and you call that into your service without having to employ someone to do it. Actually, I think that's really powerful. I think that could really start stepping forward some of these different sort of areas of technology. And then we also talked about those companies who change the way business works. Uber, Airbnb. They are heavily, the consumers have taken them on. Consumers are using them all the time. So actually being able to use some of their skill sets, some of their APIs, it feels like a natural thing to be able to use in your own applications to make it easier for users to kind of do stuff. That's the point of technology, isn't it? Let's try and make stuff easier, more efficient, more easy to get things done, that kind of thing.
I'll just give a local pitch here. Catherine Stanley, she's giving a talk on testing microservices at Devoxx UK. She's down at the IBM booth. Go talk to her if you're interested in how do you test microservices. She's a fantastic talk that we approved as part of the program. And she's also showing on how they're building a microservices greenfield application. Not a good idea, I completely agree. You should really feel the pain for a monolith before you migrate to microservice. And she's showing how they're building a microservices application using Java EE on Liberty Profile. So that's worth a look. It's down in the exhibitor hall. Okay.
So Amy brought up Uber and brought up, well, we've got a litany of services out there that we're consuming and that we're dependent on. I'm sure Azure's going nowhere, but some of these are unicorn businesses that are going through rounds of funding. They're not really making money yet. We're building our businesses on top of them. How, as both developers and architects, and also as people who are responsible to the businesses, do we deal with the fact that these massive organizations and the smaller ones that we're picking up might not be around? It's not like the open source world where we include a library. They're running the service. It's not like it's open source where we can run it ourselves. How does that affect us?
I think the only constant in this business world is the change. If you're not using Uber, use Lyft, man. I don't care really. End of the day, my customers need a service. Today, for example, and I think that's sort of the abstraction you need to provide, that end of the day, your customers need a service. They need to go from point A to point B. Or they need to store an information into the database. If your MySQL sucks, use Couchbase. I don't care. End of the day, you want to provide a service over there. Store this damn data into the database. What is your actual persistence mechanism? I think that's the level of abstraction you need to up-level yourself when you're designing your services. That's how I see it.
Plus, owning your own availability is a really important fact. It's one thing bringing in a library, which you could fork, but who here's actually forked a library and then taken on maintainership of it after using it? It doesn't happen very often, but it can do. But if you're, as a business, consuming other people's services without a really good SLA in place, then it's just irresponsible. So I wouldn't do it personally.
You go first. I completely forgot what I was about to say.
I haven't said it, totally. So I was going to say two things there. The first is sort of notion again from domain-driven design. I think Arun was touching on this. Is things like anti-corruption layers, ACLs. So basically transposing data. So you within your boundary, this is your notion of an entity or a value object, that kind of thing. And then you'll be consuming, say, some other service. But if that service comes and goes in terms of the actual business, it's not a problem. You can design like another adapter. We're talking design patterns. Basically, you can have the notion of an adapter for a service. So anti-corruption layers for the win. Do that quite a bit when I'm not sure if the target third party is going to meet my needs, but there's a few choices in the market, for example. So I define a sort of our internal model, our interface, put an anti-corruption layer on front. The second thing is big part of architecture stuff, and I take a lot of my cues from Simon Brown, who is speaking here today, so check out Simon later on today. But he says architecture is a lot about, say, shared understanding, but stakeholder management and risk management as well. So riffing off what Chris was saying there, basically, part of when I've got my architect hat on, part of what I do is I review do basically due diligence on third parties. So you can look at things. There's a great website called DueDil, and it actually gives you the financials of companies. So if it's like a startup, you can see what kind of, well, to some degree, you can see what kind of risk you'd be taking by working with that third party. Are they VC funded? How much money have they got in the bank? That kind of thing. So that's quite useful. But also word on the street, going to conferences, asking people, reading TechCrunch, reading InfoQ, that kind of thing. You get a feel for some services are kind of faltering. Sometimes it just happens randomly and there's nothing you can do about that. That is it. I think it was a photo sharing, a very famous photo sharing site went down recently, and a lot of people would put their lifetime memories in that site, and it just literally disappeared overnight and caused chaos. They call them like black swan events. Like these things just happen, yeah. So you've got to do your risk management, do your due diligence, but sometimes bad stuff just happens. So always have kind of a contingency plan in place. Kind of that when that bad day does happen, don't be just left standing going, oh my god. At least have a process to follow to kind of mitigate some of that risk, some of the damage potentially.
Yeah, I think I agree with Arun. A lot of what you said around sort of right technology, right time. The only thing we know is going to happen is things are going to change and keep moving forwards. And how many different types of technology have we probably used already? Like think about the last sort of 18 months, I don't know, 2 years. It's like, wow, so many different types of things coming out, new things, and that's only going to keep pushing forward. So, as Dan said, kind of looking around what is out there, what's possible, what's in preview, try it out. There's lots of options now with cloud services as well to just try stuff out, proof of concept, even for free a lot of the time. You get sort of a few calls or something like that with it, and just have a go. Would this fit in? Maybe DevOps is going to help us there as well, some kind of agile development. If things start to look like they're dipping off or not taking off as was expected, maybe we can swip and swap them out. Maybe actually a lot of the technology we're building now is helping us do a lot of that kind of stuff.
So I'll give a very recent example, not so recent, about 3 months ago. Facebook shuts down parse. This was one of the mobile, what the mobile developers were heavily relying upon for their database. And that's when, a lot of our customers, who were not our customers at that point of time, they were using parse, and they said, what do I do? What are my options over there? Now, Facebook can shut down that API. So Facebook is OK, but they shut down an API because it's not making money for it. So things can change, and that's when we wrote a blog. We got a lot of hits from Reddit, for example. Why, if parse isn't working for you? Because end of the day, Facebook is controlling the data. They don't give you access to the data. But one of the nice things that Facebook did is they actually wrote a blog post. Hey, we are shutting down parse, but here are your options where you can look at it. We will give you an option to extract the data out of parse and put it in a NoSQL database of your choice. So we wrote something like, you can extract data from parse, put it into Couchbase, and that blog got a lot of hits. So I think the point, again, being companies will change, companies' policies will change, the products and the APIs they support will change. It's like you got to be constantly on the toes, make sure your app is working, and your customer experience is not shaken because of that.
I think it's just like we talk about being a good API citizen, there's being a good service citizen too. And I think that world's going to mature going forward.
So one thing that Arun said there, which I think is really important, and I've sort of been factoring in this to some of my decisions, is one big red flag for APIs is if you cannot get the data. So like some services, that's kind of how it works perhaps, but I'm always suspicious, and I can't name names, but I've seen many horror stories in companies I work with where they've been really stitched up because part of the contract is a third party maintains the data and you actually contractually cannot get access to the raw data. You have to go through their APIs and so forth. And they are completely at the mercy of that service provider then. And they can often do rent extraction, kind of like you're locked in, we'll jack up the price, tough luck. So a real big red flag, just coming back to what we're saying in terms of being a good service citizen. If I'm looking at a third-party service and I cannot at any given time get sort of a bulk data download or access to my data, I am super suspicious. Just want to chuck that one out there.
Okay, cool. But so we've consuming more and more services, but you can draw a parallel with consuming more and more libraries. Look at how big your dependency graphs are now compared to where they were 10 years. We're not writing as much code and building algorithms anymore. Andrew Bundle asks, do you feel development is now more about wiring libraries together rather than hardcore coding?
I'll have a stab at that one. So, yeah, I've definitely noticed in my sort of 10, 15-year career, I'm probably writing less sort of business logic code and more glue code potentially, particularly with microservices, that kind of thing as well. That's not a bad thing, but I think we're seeing a sort of separation of concerns within the industry. Like, I know people that say, for example, are writing things like Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, like they're working kind of on providing bits and pieces for us as developers to build on top of. So there's always going to be those hard distributed computing problems at the moment, for example, in things like Kubernetes and even things like Couchbase, for example, like data replication, that kind of stuff is a fundamentally hard computer science problem, and there's some cool stuff to do there, cool code to be written. So if you like that, get involved with that. But on the flip side, I think there's sort of with the separation of concerns, you can almost get away with not writing that much code as a developer now. You can be gluing things together. And the kind of holy grail, which we've been flirting with for probably 20, 30 years even, to be honest, is the notion of component-based software, where you can just literally buy components and plug them together. And then you have things like BPM and BPEL, which are like business process mapping languages, where you high-level constructs and kind of anyone in the business can actually map together processes. You even see it things like more low-level with Camel and Spring integration, that kind of thing. But I do think this notion of high-level processes where business people can be mapping things together, buying off-the-shelf components. We're even seeing it a little bit in Hybris. As any of you know, SAP Hybris, it's an online e-commerce platform, and they're actually doing Hybris as a service now. So you can literally buy these things and plug them together, and you can build yourself an e-commerce shop to infinite specification. And I see that's very much how the industry is progressing. It's going to be a choice for us as developers, I think. You can either get super low level, probably somewhere in the middle, or you can go super high level. And that'll be more, we're seeing the rise of the more sort of commercially savvy developer, the more entrepreneurial developer, that kind of thing. Yeah,
I was going to probably hit off that last bit maybe around sort of I've not been in the industry that long, kind of just a minute, so I'm not seeing the circles of technology maybe and stuff like that, but I've even found I probably code specific stuff a lot less and use a lot lower libraries. It's absolutely is a trend, and actually again services out there, you tend to then consume them, and in fact some services are even codeless. We're moving towards that kind of click next maybe kind of and create a service, but actually all of these different technologies have different expertise. So if we relate it to the Internet of Things, if you are a hardware developer and you absolutely revel in like efficient code on devices, that is a core expert piece that's going to be needed for the Internet of Things. But that doesn't mean you're going to be really good at the bit over here where you have to actually evaluate all of that messy raw data that comes from these tiny devices. There's a whole spectrum of skills that are still absolutely needed, deep knowledge. But for then the masses, for everyone to be able to start implementing this, especially in businesses aren't, I think after talking to customers, it's going less from IT just being the people who give you devices and the people who keep the network up, to actually making massive impact on a business and building some really innovative. A lot of different businesses now have innovation teams who build these cool things that are going to change the way a business works. And I think for those guys to then be able to plug together all their different expertise and then use all these services can actually produce this this huge thing where every company is becoming a technology focused company. So maybe that's less the developer angle.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel that it's very much, they're two different jobs, I think. I think it's a choice you need to make as a developer, because I don't think there's a decline in the core engineering jobs. If you look on Apache, for instance, there is a new Apache database about every 3 days. Not literally, but pretty much. So if you want to go and work on it, think how many new NoSQL databases there are over the last 5 years. It's absolutely exploded. And most of these VC-funded companies will hire you to work remotely, and you can have a hardcore engineering job which requires you to be very up to date with with academia. Or the London job market, working in person, is kind of skewed more towards either banking and like retail and e-commerce, etc. And yeah, I completely see those jobs as being, you have to absorb vast quantities of frameworks, know how to use them quickly, know how to select the right one, know how to realize this one is probably going to be rubbish, this one will work, etc. And I feel like they are completely different skills.
So if we talk about skill diversity there, if we pick up on a few other examples, like consuming big data, and you can be a developer working for CERN, and that's as black and white as building a shopping cart. Do you see that the world of the software development is going to fragment into specialties, and that we're going to have to diversify more in terms of a skill set? But is it going to be software development as generic as being an engineer?
I think the wonderful thing about being a software engineer is, it's completely fragmented. I think they're completely different communities. But because virtually all of the resources for flipping between them are online and free, like you could say, okay, I've done 10 years of development at banks or at media companies, at Sky, BBC, etc. You could say, okay, I want a different job now. And over the course of a year, you could probably self-educate. So I do see them fragmented, but I do see if you're motivated, you can flip between them as and when you want. You might take a pay cut, though.
Yeah, I mean, for Couchbase, for example, we have a mobile product and a server product. The way we reach out to these communities is very different. Typically a mobile developer, they don't care about what the server is offering. The data is getting stored for me somewhere in the server. I don't care where it is. And the way data is being stored in the server, they don't care who is consuming it. So there are, in that sense, fragmented markets, but the whole concept of software engineering is still valid. Even within mobile, for example, I just hired a mobile developer advocate. I wanted somebody who could run the entire developer advocate efforts for Couchbase Mobile. For Couchbase Mobile is an iOS, Android, Xamarin, and a whole bunch of platforms, but the person only knows Android. So I can only cater to Android. And it's very hard to find a developer who knows both Android and Xamarin and iOS. So even within the mobile itself is pretty fragmented, but I think the fundamentals of software engineering are still the same. Yes, we may not be following the classic SDLC lifecycle, but the whole concept of agility and how do you do CI/CD and all those things, those are across the software engineering realm.
Thanks, guys. So I work for a company called Open Credo. We're a consultancy, and we actually have pretty much two tracks. Just to riff off Dan saying there, we have we call them generalizing specialists. So that's kind of me. My background is Java development, but I like a whole bunch of stuff. I like ops, I like business, I like entrepreneurial stuff. Then we have technical specialists, real deep dive Cassandra people, and we work in harmony basically. Because sometimes you need Amy said, you need to identify what the business value is. When we work with customers, they're like, this is actually how we add value to our customers. And there's some notion, I go in and I look at the architecture and join things up and see how things kind of, could be improved at the higher level. But then there's a heck of a lot of value to be added at the lower level. So I was chatting to Chris actually last night about this. We're seeing a lot of people using Cassandra at the moment as a relational database, and it's just not working. So we get phone calls saying, hey, we got Cassandra, kind of, it's not performing. We go in, it's it's because you're treating it like MySQL, treating it like Oracle. Then so we'll fix that, no problem. That's deep dive technical speciality. But then we say to them, what led you to make that choice? Let me have a look at your processes, your decision-making processes, how your culture kind of operates. And then we can step sort of back up through, and having the actual processes to, decide on what technology to use and stuff and so forth is really valuable. And it's kind of a different skill set as we're all kind of riffing off here. But there's still very much a need for high level, low level, and probably everywhere in between in terms of what you actually do as a skill. I would just say there's a slight skew at the moment, rightly or wrongly, and more so in America, I think, with more money being at the notion of the generalizing specialist. Because when you're closer to the business, you tend to be closer to the money. That's not true in terms of San Francisco and the Bay Area, because if you're super techie, there's lots of money to be had there. But I've definitely noticed that. So it's interesting if you're sort of thinking about, like Chris saying, that making that career change, totally doable. I've seen that, kind of done that myself a little bit. But do you think, I'm certainly not in it for the money, to be honest. I like to enjoy my job first and foremost. But the money is kind of important. And, depending on your own goals, just have a think about that. Like, what do you actually want to get out of your career? And different, I think, career paths will give you different things.
Great. So if we're talking about evolution, and we take a step back to DevOps again and just have a look at the trends there. So we've moved to DevOps with microservices. We've now moving to not writing our microservices perhaps and running them ourselves. We've got serverless, so being able to use Azure Functions or Lambda, and that's been coined NoOps. It's really just someone else's ops team, but fine. Another word for open sourcing if you want, outsourcing. But are we going to end up with no dev?
That would be nice, yeah. I'm just getting paid for doing nothing. No, I agree. Well, I mean, I think it's a constant evolution. How many of you write Corba code anymore? Oh my God, really? Yeah. But I mean, I think it's a constant evolution. It's a software life cycle. I mean, if you think about it, distributed programming many, many years ago used to be DCE, then Corba, then RMI, then EJVs. And then, we kept evolving from there. And I agree, I was actually wanted to mention serverless architecture particularly. And that's where it gives scalability. You can literally focus on your core competency, just drop that code, somewhere in AWS Lambdas, and it'll take care of notifications. It'll take care of the event-driven programming and all of those things. There will always be need for development and engineering, as a matter of fact, always. Now, no matter what, it's just that we will keep up-leveling ourselves in the stack. We're going to keep focusing more on the orchestration, the composition of these different services. I mean, today, you can pretty much, if you are a Swift developer or an Android developer, you can write a mobile application without writing a lot of logic, but just pulling these services, pull the service from Uber, pull the service from PayPal, and just connect the dots over there. That's what Uber is essentially, as a matter of fact. Just connecting a bunch of drivers, some piece of software written, and with 5,000 people who are just selling Uber essentially. So I don't think there will ever be a need where there is no software. There is always software embedded anywhere in the line, but how deep down the stack it is and how up level of composition you are doing, I think that's the point.
Yeah, I absolutely think that software engineering will be around forever, because we talk about serverless, we look at Lambda and Azure Function and things. The engineering, the software engineers who build that to allow you to do it is like some of the most interesting stuff around. Maybe you're at the abstraction level where you now just build yourself a Docker image as your thing. Who do you think is building the framework which allows that to be deployed and scaled, and if an instance goes down, it gets spun up on a new host? There might be a change in where the software engineering is happening, but it's there, and I'd say it's greater than before.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. Yeah, with both of you really, around sort of having that idea of it moving, but as technology moves forward, someone needs to kind of keep pushing it, right? We all need to keep moving it forward. So it's probably changed from the past, and we maybe forget about kind of, oh, well, technology didn't used to do that. We didn't used to do that sort of thing, and then we get used to what it's currently like now, and then as we move forward, it gets uncomfortable, and then it gets comfortable again, and what's the new shiny, what's the new service, what's the new, I think it's just a natural progression. I don't feel like it'll, just because of technology we have right now, whether it'll change. I think it's the natural progression, really.
But, Amy, do you think that artificial intelligence is going to... if we look at manual labour, the robots have taken over... they quite literally are. If you look at Amazon and how no one's picking stuff off the shelves anymore, you're firing robots away. It won't be too long before we see that in Asda. But with AI getting more advanced and sophisticated, AlphaGo shows great creativity. Are we going to see the more skilled things and the more creative things being taken over by AI?
So I see personally in the near future it being humans and machines. Looking as far ahead as I could possibly see, probably it was working together. There's things that machines are really good at, and there's things that we are really good at, and actually pulling us together. It's going to sound really honest, like bionic, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Bringing together our skill sets is probably the really key thing. Everyone has a boring bit of their job. Wouldn't you like that to kind of go away in some senses? Do you know what I mean? Everyone has that admin side. Everyone has. Expenses always gets to me, right? Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh no, I want to go and talk at another event or something like that. But it's there's always something. Machines are very, very good at spotting patterns in data. They don't make mistakes around very, very repetitive things. And absolutely, we're starting to build creativity. But it's creativity from patterns, from seeing, from learning. So we are understanding this learning piece, but I'm not sure. Yeah, and who knows? It will keep evolving. But actually, can we learn to work together as a symbiosis? It's called in biology, isn't it? So and that works well in nature. So it'd be nice to think of us both working together. I think is my thoughts out on that one.
As long as we don't have Arnie turning up, that's all fine. No Terminator stuff.
Anyone?
Yeah, I'll just basically, just to add, ripping off what Amy's saying there, I was reading a fascinating article actually on HBR last month, at Harvard Business Reviews. Really cool. If you're a techie looking to get into business, check out Harvard Business Review. It's obviously a US publication, but it's really understandable. I love that publication. And it actually said about augmentation is the next thing. And I totally get that, as in just basically riffing off what Amy's saying. There's some things we as humans are not good at, other things like totally the pattern, like kind of like seeing things and reasoning and stuff. But augmentation, I see, like if anyone's into the computer games like Deus Ex, that kind of thing, Deus Ex is a freaking awesome game, I can see that being kind of the next level. Like not only is there cognitive augmentation in terms of now a lot of what we do as jobs, we don't need to store data because we carry around mobile phones and computers with all basically access to the wide web and access to all the data. So data storage, like back a few years ago, part of being an expert was having all the data in your brain, having all the information, all the knowledge. Less so now. You can put that on a computer. But it kind of means your job changes a little bit in terms of the skills needed. No longer do you have to recall all the facts, but you've got to know sort of how to combine things. That kind of stuff is like super important, I think.
One of the notes that the San Francisco mayor, Gavin Newsom, made is that the jobs that our kids are going to work, like my son is just about to start high school in a couple of months, that the jobs that they're going to work on, they have not been created yet. 10 years ago, the kids who were in school, who would have thought they will be building iPhone apps or Android apps as a professional developer? So we are listening about augmentation, virtual reality, AI. Are these the jobs that our kids are going to work on? So I think going back to my original point, it's a constant evolution. I'm glad my kids are not writing EJBs. I'm glad my kids are not doing core web programming. They're going to be working at a higher abstraction. But that's a constant evolution we need. That's what a kick we need to keep evolving ourselves and up-leveling ourselves.
So just pulling that in, as well as what we were talking about before with Amy, and there being more skills and more people involved, in like psychiatrists being involved or data analysts, we've got a wide range of skills now being needed inside of our profession. Has diversity ever been more important?
Absolutely, and I think diversity is very important. And I think I would like to pitch something that I believe personally and very passionate about, which is Devoxx for kids. We have seen the numbers, at Devoxx for Kids, which is a worldwide initiative where we promote technology to kids around the world. We have seen about 35% of girls. If you look at the room around you, you're probably about 10% of girl. So somewhere from that 35%, we lose that 25% in school or college or somewhere in the pipeline. So diversity is very important, actually, as a matter of fact. And I always encourage, there is a girl in my team, and she brings a unique perspective. I very, very value that. And diversity, not in just terms of men and women, but I want people from different culture to come up. It's a very humbling experience on how cultural perspectives play an important role, a very significant role in software development. You're talking to people from a different country, different culture. The way they see things, the way they perceive things, bring a unique perspective, and that's what leads to a brand new idea. Think about that Gangnam Style. That guy was just building it in a garage and became a super instant hit. So I think those are the things that are hidden. We don't know what gems we are still waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, there are other types of diversity as well. Like I work in a team at the moment which has someone who is much, much, much better than me at sysadmin, and it's amazing. Like you just see things from a completely different perspective. I think sometimes as developers we're like, yeah, developers are the best. We can do everything. But when you get someone who knows way more about a topic than you and they're feeding into discussions, then I think that's just way better for teams.
Yeah, and like Dan said a second, we had a chat just before this, didn't we? And I was thinking, actually, in a lot of the spaces that we're moving towards and these new virtual reality and autonomous vehicles and stuff like that, there's a lot actually around it that's not technology related, that's ethics or that's legislation and stuff like that. And that has to be a conversation that has to be made with the people who design and make it as well. So actually for developers to work in conjunction with all of these other different skill sets. And absolutely, we said very, very different mindsets, very, very different ways about approaching problems. But actually, you could really learn stuff from each other, and maybe things like psychologists and sociologists and stuff like that about how people use technology, truly use technology, could be really interesting.
Yeah, so I was like super lucky, just a little bit about my history. When I went to uni, it was an IT course I did, and it was literally 50-50 split between girls and boys. Freaking awesome. Like, just like Arun said, it was honestly, it was a crazy year. Just so happened, it was brilliant. When I got to industry, sadly, it all like changed. But in terms of what you're saying, like Arun, just the male and female, just as one example of diversity, is only one example. It's just the ways we think are clearly different at times. And then I studied a PhD actually after uni, and I went from being, say, like, well, when I was undergrad, it was like 95% English people, 5%, say, foreign students, and it was a complete flip when I did the PhD. There was like 2 of us were English in the whole department, and it was just stunning. I learned from good friends from Iran, from China, from Greece, from Spain, and because of the cultural sort of heritage and upbringing and approaches, like, we were coming up with some amazing sort of solutions. It's a bit biased there, but in terms of it was a lot of fun, basically, sort of thinking and being sort of pulled in different ways of thoughts and so forth from people with different experience was really good. And something I strive in my teams now, like Chris said as well, to mix in people that are like super good at one thing, but also then mix in different people, different thought processes. And something I'm going to, like, a bit of a self-plug here, I did a talk actually at CraftConf about a month ago on empathy. Now, I think, like, we've all sort of touched on it here, empathy is super important. When you're building something for someone or working in a team even, you need to see things from their perspective, yeah? So you're going to see talked about more, but there's some great books. Jeff Sussner's got Designing Delivery. There's a book just called Empathy, which is really good. The ability to, classically as technologists, we just built stuff, whereas now we need to think more about others, I think. So this notion of empathy, clearly the more diverse group you've got, the easier it is to empathize. Me as the stereotypical, middle-class white male, it's hard for me to empathize sometimes with certain groups, certain people. Whereas if my team is diverse, if I can't empathize, someone else can. So I think empathy and diversity are super, super important.
Yeah, and to pick up on what Chris was saying, a wise lady once told me a long time ago, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I strive to be in the right room all the time.
As Steve Jobs said, stay hungry, stay foolish, all the time. And if you are not hungry for knowledge, you are in the wrong room. You're in the wrong area.
And I have had people challenge me before about diversity. So you care more about others. It's like, well, no, actually, I'm being selfish. I can only do so much myself. I can only know so much myself. I'm not a crack DBA. I'm not a crack sysadmin either. But so how on earth can I relate to other areas that I don't have that experience for? And yeah, it's incredibly selfish for me to want that.
Well, I think one of the things that I see is we got one mouth and 2 ears. That means you should listen twice, speak once. It generally happens the other way around. So always be, I have a team of 5 people in my company from different countries. I'm always looking for their ideas. And instead of me making a decision, I let the team make a decision. And then they are bought in, and then they are doing the things, and it's their decision. So I think that always that perspective, that diversity brings a whole value to it.
So given that we've got the program committee here, some of us have been on the program committees both here and for other conferences and in DevOps for some time. What track are we missing? What tracks are going to be coming up in the future years? Where do we think that the conference agenda is going to change over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years?
I think I will go with what Amy was saying in the sense, the more we are up-leveling ourselves in terms of composition, orchestration, ethics, legality, sociologists, how do those things start impacting software development? That would be a cool angle to see in a conference. If I'm, is it legal to download Minecraft and unjar it and decompile the source code and distribute it? Let's talk about it. Is it okay for Bucket, which is a Minecraft modding API, which was shut down by DMCA? These guys registered Bucket domain in a different country, and now they're distributing the source code because DMCA is not valid over there. So I think things like those I don't think we talk about that a lot. So the usual software development technologies, etc., will continue. Today is Docker, tomorrow is going to be whale, then it's going to be a monkey. But I think those are the topics that are going to hit us more and more often, particularly as we become more global. And
a completely different idea would be, as well as this, would be to have more talks on fundamental things, because we get carried away, I think, at generalist conferences of doing, technology X like Docker, etc. But if we have more talks on things like the Linux kernel, or our industry conferences like Devoxx marry themselves up more with academia conferences, that stuff has been applicable for 10, 20, 30 years. And especially with the rise of so many like open source distributed databases rather than our typical database vendors, and things like queuing software, it's becoming more and more relevant that in industry you understand a bit more of the stuff from academia.
Yeah, I really like that idea, actually, having the fundamentals. I was talking to an architect the other day, and they were saying they just joined Microsoft, and I was like, gosh, that must have been a high barrier to entry to understand the whole of what's going on there and all the ins and outs. And he basically said, well, I've got experience in this industry for years and years and years. This technology, the fundamentals of it, it's just a vendor on top sort of thing. So the fundamental of real-time streaming of data, or the fundamentals of coding for IoT on devices, some of those like ideas and what is almost, like you said, stepping back to academia, where you don't learn a specific type of technology, you learn about technology. So that's an interesting one. Yeah, I like that.
So +1 to all those. I think they're awesome. And I'll sort of close with a jokey one. I think we need one like says that I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. I think that's what we need.
Thanks all for coming. It's been great talking with you.